Good afternoon. It is a somber day in Washington State, not just because of the clouds of smoke that we are suffering under. Yesterday, our state inauspiciously passed the 2,000 deaths mark of folks we've lost because of COVID-19. We mourn every single one of those lives. Every single one of those lives are not just a number, they're a family that has suffered because of this pandemic. And those families are in our hearts and will be in the months to come. This has been a year of tragedy for so many people in our state. And to them, I'd like to say that 7 million Washingtonians would like to embrace you and the trouble that you're having. And you are not alone. We are in this together, and I believe that's the fundamental precept that we have to keep in mind in the state of Washington. We've also now seen more than 80,000 COVID confirmed cases in our state. It's another significant and sobering number regarding the severity of this pandemic. And we know just how hard these times are for everyone, even if you haven't had COVID, because this disease has affected us in so many ways in the way we live our daily lives. But I have to tell you, I am heartened to seeing Washingtonians all over the state in so many ways banding together to fight this terrible disease. Washingtonians are masking up across the state. Washingtonians are limiting contact for people outside of their household. Washingtonians are practicing social distancing in so many parts of their lives. And for this, I'm very, very appreciative, because it means fewer families will suffer the loss of these 2,000 families in the future. I'm joined today with Secretary of Health John Weisman, who will be available for questions about this and other issues a little bit later. Now, our air quality, I know, is oppressive, and it remains unhealthy at best and hazardous at worst, according to our state health experts. Depends what region you're in, but virtually across the state we have concerns. The air outside right now is at historically polluted levels, according to our Department of Ecology. Preliminary data from our state's air quality monitors show that last week has produced more days of hazardous air quality than in any period since monitoring began in the early 2000s. You can find the latest information on air quality at www.wasmoke.blogspot.com. Now, our fires, just a comment, people know how severe they have been in some degree, but I do want to go through some of the specifics. The fires have burned more than 620,000 acres of our beautiful state, and more than 807,000 acres during this year, of all fires combined. More than 400 structures have burned. About half of those have been people's homes. And as I've talked about, when people lose their homes, it is much more than an economic loss. It is a blow to their security and a destruction of many of their memories. And the trauma that are with these families is something that we should not diminish, and we should look for ways to help these families. On top of these losses, we're told that in central Washington there are estimated 200 miles of power transmission lines down, with several hundred poles burned. And as I was driving by the Malden fire and the fires in Okanagan County, Douglas County, and Bridgeport, you'd see these top 8 feet of a pole hanging from wires in many, many places along the highways of these regions. And we want to thank the people who are working so hard on this. I met some of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers who are working really hard in Bridgeport the other day. Our thanks go out to them. They're working in tough conditions. Active wildfires have also closed a number of roads in our state, including areas along Highway 12 near White Pass today. And we have reports of fires threatening dams and other utilities. So it's a good thing to check on status of roads if you're going to be traveling. And please be careful and minimize any travel in areas where we might have emergency operations or recovery operations going on. Our emergency personnel need those roads. Now, having said that, we are confident we will get these fires contained. And we've been able to free up some resources to send to some of the biggest fires in other states. We're confident right now that we have enough personnel and equipment to protect our communities. And we know our neighbors in Oregon are experiencing tougher, to some degree, situation that is ongoing. So just as we have helped other states in our pandemic, we are sharing some of our resources with Oregon. It's not a lot, but it is a gesture that, again, understand we are all in this together. I'm pleased today to be joined by Dr. Crystal Raymond, who's a climate adaptation specialist and a forest ecologist with the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington. And in just a minute, I'd like her to speak and address some of the science involving these climate-exacerbated fires. So here's what we know, and there's some things we know. They're not subject to dispute. There are things that we know. The science is very clear, and our common experience is very clear, seeing the increase in fires that have been so horrendous the last several years. And that is that our fire seasons are becoming more intense. This is clear. And it was disappointing because the president had a chance to learn about that yesterday in California, but instead he just gave deception and smirked in the faces of those who've had terrible losses and those who've been working so hard to reduce these risks of fires. You know, as a person who has talked to Washingtonians and watched them cry at the loss of their homes in the last few days, this is maddening to me, because it seems to me it ought to be a job that we all ought to protect Washingtonians from fire, not diminish this clear risk of climate change induced and increased fire. And I've seen too much suffering to think that we should ignore this clear and present danger to the health of Washingtonians. I wrote an open letter to the president yesterday with the science behind this. And we know this, it's not just the science, it's observations. You know, when I talked to some of the incident commanders, they knew what caused this. Extreme aridity, extreme dryness of grass and sagebrush together with wind. And we know that that lack of humidity is going to increase, and already has, because of changes in the climate. When you talk to firefighters, it's pretty impressive, because they tell you that the rules of fighting fires have changed because the climate is changing. Whether it's Malden or Bonnie Lake, firefighters themselves with decades of experience are telling me that they've never seen fires like this before because of this extreme aridity combined with wind. Now, this is despite our efforts and despite our investments in land management, which we are doing in the state of Washington. It appears that the president just really doesn't understand that. And honestly, it is outrageous to me to have a president to criticize states when the president himself called for cutting budgets that could be used to take care of the national forests. And of course, most of the forest land in the West is in their national forests, over 45% in the state. We got 12% state forests. In California, I think it's over 50% national, only like 3% state forests. But the president's budget proposal for 2020 would have cut $950 million from the U.S. Forest Service, including a 16% cut to state wildlife action plans. 2 years before that, this president, who comes and criticizes us on the West Coast, proposed cutting $300 million from the Forest Service wildlife initiatives. So we're not going to have someone who doesn't know which end of an axe to hold be criticizing us when he himself has tried to reduce some of these actions in the West Coast. Now, we do know that forest management may be an important part of this, but it's only one of the many cogs and what has to be a coordinated strategy where the federal government needs to be a better partner. What we're experiencing right now stresses the urgent need for climate integrated plans to address natural disasters that are intensified by human-caused climate change. And we know the best way to reduce the damages caused by climate change is to stop climate change, efforts that Washington State is leading on. And we are proud of our state's effort and proud to have some of the best laws in the United States to give us clean electricity that does not pollute and more efficient buildings. And we have more work to do in this regard. So I've asked Crystal to join us today to talk about what is driving the intensity of these wildfires and just some of the crucial steps needed to address the problem for our own sake and for our children and grandchildren's. So with that, Crystal, if you can introduce yourself a bit and turn it over for your comments.
Great, thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And I'm Crystal Raymond. I'm a climate adaptation specialist with the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington. I'm also a fire ecologist. I've been studying fire and the connection to climate change for over 10 years now. And as the governor said, the connection between climate change and increasing wildfire potential across the West has been clearly established by science for over a decade. The situation that we're in now is unfortunate, but it does not come as a surprise to fire scientists who have been studying this issue for several years across the region. Higher temperatures and drier summers are drying vegetation and fuels across the western U.S. throughout our fire season, so that when we do have ignitions or the right wind conditions, which we've experienced over the last couple of days, wildfires are more likely to spread. The stage has been set. These wildfires are likely to be larger fires as we have been experiencing. And as climate change continues, we will see higher and higher temperatures. We will see a greater potential for wildfire across the region. As bad as it is now, as high as the risks are now, they will continue to worsen as long as climate change continues to worsen. We can expect to see more extreme fire danger days, longer fire seasons, more large wildfires, and an overall greater acreage burned across our forest and grassland ecosystems in the state. If we don't take action now to slow climate change, the wildfire potential will only get worse. I think many people often think of the wildfire issue as something that affects Western Washington or affects Eastern Washington, but what we've seen now is this affects Western Washington and Western Oregon as well. Many people may be surprised to know that, in fact, we have had very large and fast-moving wildfires in the past. In the late 1800s, the early 1900s, we've had some similar large wildfires in this region. The difference now is that climate change is making this problem worse, and that we have many more communities, many more people living in the path of these fires. And so when we do get them now, the consequences are much more severe. And as a result of that, there's been growing concern among many people that we will see these types of large fires in Western Oregon and Washington, and that's what we're seeing happening now. Washington has been somewhat spared. This year, things could have been worse, and that's because we had less of a drought than Oregon experienced. But with climate change, we expect to see drier conditions and more frequent droughts happening here in Washington as well. And we may not be as lucky in the future. And as the governor mentioned, the worst air quality that some of us have experienced here in Portland and Seattle area. We recognize that wildfires don't need to happen right in our own backyard to cause these extreme unhealthy air quality situations. They can happen throughout the West, and it just takes the right winds to bring that poor air quality to our region. As with wildfire danger, as long as climate change worsens, we can expect these poor air quality events to become more frequent. And science has also shown that climate change is only one piece of the wildfire equation. We know that there are other important factors that contribute to wildfire risk in our region. That includes how we manage our forests and our vegetation. It includes development and the wildland-urban interface. It also includes human-caused ignitions. All of these factors are important. And we also know that the relevance of these different factors varies depending on what region of the state we're in. These play a different role in eastern Washington and western Washington, and therefore the solutions that we look at need to be tailored to the specific area and the role that fire plays in that area. But we know that all these factors, including climate change, are a part of the equation, and that the situation is not getting better until we address climate change directly, as the governor had said. Truly addressing the problem requires us to look at vegetation management, to look at how we develop in the urban interface, and to look at how we're addressing the long-term problem of climate change. And I'm happy to address more of the science behind these causes of the wildfire situation that we're experiencing now.
Well, I want to thank you for that excellent recitation, very quick rundown. By the way, Crystal, if I can, this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but the reading I've done on the science of this indicates that there are multiple scientific assessments that are consistent with what you've just suggested. Is that a fair statement? This is not just sort of one research paper that you did. There are multiple assessments, including by the national assessment of the federal government, that's consistent with what you've shared with us. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct. There's been a number of scientific papers that have addressed this issue, whether they're looking at longer fire seasons, more acreage burned, the number of large fires. No matter what metrics you're looking at, a number of different studies have shown that there is a trend in those and that is expected to get worse with climate change. We've seen this for studies that have looked in different parts of the western U.S., that have looked at the western U.S. as a whole. This information exists in the scientific literature, and it has also been summarized in regional climate impacts reports that our group has put out, as well as the National Climate Assessment. So there are multiple different lines of evidence, multiple different sources that together are showing this strong connection between climate and wildfire.
Well, listening to you, it doesn't sound like the president's prediction that things are going to cool down is something we can take to the bank, and I wish that they were so. Crystal, thank you. If you can stay with us for some questions later, potentially, I appreciate it. I had a few more comments, if that's okay. Can you stick around for a few minutes? Crystal?
Yes, I can stick around for questions. That would be great.
Thank you. So just comments before you take a question, another COVID-related issue. I just want to report that I had a productive meeting with the Washington State University and Pullman communities last week to talk about how we can learn from their experience to prevent similar spikes. We had a huge spike in Pullman with maybe 800 cases in Pullman, largely because of returning Washington State University students. And we cannot allow that to happen in other colleges and other cities. It is just too dangerous to have those similar spikes. Pullman had one of the top 5 cities as far as infections a couple weeks ago, and we just have to do a better job than that. So we know other universities will have students coming back, and even if their classrooms are remote, what we're finding is that students tend to like to socialize. We certainly understand that. But that socialization that takes place in apartments and dorms is killing us. And that's what's happened in Pullman. So I will be having further discussions with administration, leaders of colleges, the student body leadership, and police agencies. Tomorrow, actually, we're having a discussion to share how we can all be active to prevent these horrendous events from happening in other college communities. And this is important, obviously, not just for the college students whose health we care about. We know that young people may be less susceptible, but they can have very severe consequences. But these communities, if people come back to Bellingham and Ellensburg and in Olympia and Vancouver and then affect the rest of the community, this is just unacceptable. So I'm looking forward to all of us pitching in to encourage students to act responsibly and socially distance and not allow the desire to party overcome our desire not to kill people in your family and your community. So I'm looking forward to some pretty aggressive actions in that regard. I also want to thank the Pullman police who have actually issued citations to party operators. And the Pullman City Council is considering a further ordinance to allow citations against party goers under these situations. So I'm looking forward to us all pitching in. I also want to say that there is reason for concern in this regard. We just cannot abandon our gains that we have had. The latest projections from the Institute for Disease Modeling have not been hugely encouraging because they indicate there may have been an uptick in our R0 number, our effective number. You see the graph here, and we've gone perhaps above 1 again. It's possible this coincides with more fall activity starting up, such as return to classes, but it's surely a reminder that this disease demands our continued diligence. We need to keep up our great work. Have some good news on this front. We expect soon to be able to announce some start of efforts to be able to use apps to notify people when they've been in the proximity of someone else who's been positive. It's work we're doing with our partners in the Western States Pact, which will use technology to get secure and timely information to people so that they could look after their own health. And this is something that's been worked out so that there are not privacy violations. Well, we hope to have more to say about that in the next few days about announcements of the next step. So with that, happy to stand for your questions, and I know Crystal and Dr. Weisman would also like to do so.
First question comes from Joe with the Seattle Times. Joe, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, question for the governor or Secretary Weisman. Can you walk us through what you know about the increase in, I believe it's the Eastern Washington COVID transmission rate? Is that all attributable to Whitman County, or are you seeing other transmission bad signs elsewhere?
John, we'll take that.
Right, so indeed the largest uptick really is in Whitman County in the association with the students' return, as the governor said. We are seeing a little bit of uptick in a few counties, but the central counties have been sort of starting to come down. You know, the great success that Yakima's had, Okanagan's rates are coming down as well. Benton's have been coming down. So, you know, the large activity right now seems to be in Whitman, although there are certainly still cases in those central counties and in Spokane. So we're keeping an eye on all of that. And again, I think the message for everyone is